Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to SBM's Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. Brian Kelly has another engagement today, so we are joined by our frequent guest co-host, Kelli Saunders. Kelli, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Kelli Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBM. Always happy to be with you. And Sarah, I think we have a new member to welcome.
You know, Kelli, we usually do have a new member to welcome, but the person who handles that is actually on some paternity leave. So we're just going to
Oh,
welcome all of our new members and point out a new feature that we're sharing every Monday on Facebook, and that is a new member welcome. So you can check out the whole list of new members who joined us in the last week on our social media channels.
well, I stand corrected. And actually, it is for a very good reason. Many of you know Winston on our team, and he did welcome a baby girl last week. So we were really happy for him.
Yes, absolutely. We understand he's probably got other things on his mind right now than a few little tasks here. So Kelly, we have a special guest who's joined us today. We've obviously covered the Michigan Supreme Court ruling that resulted in the increased minimum wage, the tipped credit phase out, and the mandated paid sick leave quite frequently. But what I think people want to know is what can be done about it. So I'm going to turn it over to you for a conversation with one of your colleagues.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So we have talked about this topic in depth. And just a reminder that we do have a group that frequently meets every week, actually, called the Big Six. And it's a collective of the biggest business organizations in the state, us being one of them, the Detroit Regional Chamber, the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, Michigan Manufacturers Association, Business Leaders for Michigan, and the Grand Rapids Chamber. And when the Michigan Supreme Court ruling came down, we really got together along with a larger group of stakeholders to talk about and to identify the issues with the earned sick time pieces specifically. Because over time, the Restaurant Lodging Association, Michigan Licensed Beverage Association had done a really extensive job in preserving the tip credit and talking about minimum wage. And what our group found is that there was kind of this hole that was seeking to be filled about the knowledge of what the earned sick time piece really, the devastation essentially that it would have if it were to go into place as is. And so I've invited my friend Josh Lunger from the Grand Rapids Chamber to join us today. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs, and we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about what's been happening recently. But Josh, can you just introduce yourself, obviously what you do at the Grand Rapids Chamber, and talk a little bit about what the Grand Rapids Chamber does, your mission?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And as always, it's been great working with you, especially over the last couple of years as we've been spending so much more time working with the Big Six and other partners. So the Grand Rapids Chamber represents almost 3,000 employers, mostly across Greater West Michigan, but scattered throughout the state and region as well. Much like the Small Business Association, we put a lot of effort into advocacy. We try to represent the West Michigan voice in Lansing, but then do a significant amount of city, county, and regional items as well. But our team does so much more than just government affairs. Everything from leadership programs, talent development, and all of the business growth things you'd expect from a chamber of commerce. But my role as Vice President of Government Affairs is working with Kelly to try to keep things on the rails for employers, especially small businesses, as we look at potential impact of the Supreme Court ruling. I know we were just talking about it prior to this call on the phone with leadership today. We were asked, so what else you got that's on your radar? And it was like, well, this is just really it. Like I always say it'd be easier to be a single issue organization. I feel like we've all become a single issue organization for the next couple months as we try to, address the concerns that we're hearing from our members. Many of them are joint members.
Yes, definitely. We share many members, and that's why the partnership is so seamless when it comes to the end of the day. So, Josh, let's dive into basically 5 key buckets that we have, honed in on that are real large issues with the Earned Sick Time Act. If you could just dive into those, maybe starting with the no exemptions piece, that was really our #1 issue when it came to this specific new law.
I told you would love a small business exemption. But the unfortunately the act is written very poorly, and I'm sure if you're watching this, you've probably seen Kelly in action and other opportunities as well. The it's really more than just small business exemptions. There's questions about how does it apply to part-time, seasonal, temporary workers, independent contractors even, and how do you navigate that? I would say there's more uncertainty than certainty here. The Department of Labor, along with other things that we'll talk about, has kind of ruled, I shouldn't say, has provided guidance that are a little bit more business or employer friendly. But I think when we are in talking to folks, our colleagues and the attorneys that we're all talking to, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about the way things sit today, and we'd like to see that strengthen. And again, particularly is there's really no threshold for employees, and so small businesses who are going to have a much higher burden or disproportionate burden when it comes to tracking these things, and the potential risk to them is much greater. Want me to keep rolling?
Yeah, please do.
So the other item that I think Leo is the Department of Labor Economic Opportunity is kind of an agreement with what we were saying we want to do is allow for front loading of benefits. That's something a lot of employers and employees like just to say, this is what you get this year. That is something that their guidance says we can do. Again, the act reads, if you're being very strict, not as clear. And so those are really the two easiest things. When we look at a couple other items, we've got what happens if you're an employee? I mean, employers have moved a lot since COVID, right? These things were written back in 2018 or probably earlier because it was adopted then. There is a lot of very significantly generous policies out there. Most employers, work closely with employees, and they want to be competitive on the market as well. And we've been asking for an exemption for policies that exceed the minimum of the act. So just to kind of remove that administrative burden, especially from smaller businesses when they're already providing enough benefits, right? We're not trying to pull back the benefits as a coalition. We're trying to say, let's make it workable and remove some of that burden. Then the last two things I think are definitely on the minds of employers that I think it's going to be a little more challenging. One is the notification requirements. In the act, it reads that you only have to let your employer know as soon as practicable if you plan to take your benefits, in which you get 72 hours of really then, does that mean you could not show for up to 72 hours? And the impact that would have, again, especially on labor intensive or hospitality industries, things like that, you start to worry about the impact it could have during special events. I think there's a lot of rumination on what it could mean and a lot of fear and concern, rightfully so. We'd like to see that cleared up so there's a little bit less interference between an employer and employee on how they communicate there. And then the last part is just the litigation nightmare this would create. So it really puts 100% of the burden on the employer to defend an HR decision in court. It says via a rebuttable presumption, meaning essentially the employer has to go through and say, actually, I took this action because it was not tied to any of this, but they have to prove that. And when you start talking about, a couple of years down the road, looking back and an employee made an allegation, how do you prove something with that high of a bar against you? So that's going to be another challenging one that I think as we look at how the legislative sausage gets made, that we know we have quite a tough road ahead. And maybe that's where Kelli wants to go next.
Yes. So when we obviously received the Michigan Supreme Court ruling, we wanted to be very practical about the very laborious issues that this act essentially gave us. And so we wanted to make sure that we could lay it out in a very reasonable way so that when we had conversations with legislators, that they could see how maybe this act was not written by people who know HR compliance law or work in a business every day. And so, Josh, we really got to work in just creating, this document that laid out the 5 issues and how it would impact communities and having an educational conversation with legislators. Because what we realized is that the current lawmakers that sit in Lansing today were not here when Adopt and Amend occurred in 2018. And so to just assume that they understood the complexities of the Earned Sick Time Act was really not fair. And so how we approached it was, let's have a conversation about how this act is written. the obstacles that is going to come for employers and employees. And then let's have a talk about really how we can move something forward in order to provide legislative fixes that take the edge off for the business community and employees alike. And so maybe can you start to dive into on how we obviously took that approach and how it's going with legislators in both the House and the Senate?
Yeah, I'd say between us, the big six, and then that much broader group, most legislators have had seen some touch point. I would say a significant chunk of us have participated probably in, I don't know, 40, 50-ish
I think we're north of 50 at
meetings.
this point. So
Yeah. Um, just and kind of just going through what we went on this call. So we really focus, as Kelly said, on educating around the Earned Sick Time Act, and highlighting that starting with we're not trying to go back to the way things were before. What we're trying to do is make this workable, make this something that's better as it gets implemented for both employees and employers. And to that part, I think the reception is about as great as we could hope. No one's chased us out of their office or off a Zoom call. The hard part, I think, is in getting action and getting details onto a bill draft and getting that introduced, and then looking at the extremely limited calendar ahead of us.
So to that point, it's a great segue, Josh. This law is scheduled to go into effect on February 21st of 2025. So we're up against a ticking time clock. We know that the legislature is obviously back home in their districts. If anybody didn't figure it out yet, it's an election year. And so here we are. And so we know that we're not going to see legislators back in Lansing until after the election, and then maybe for a short time in November before hunting break, and then right before Christmas. And so what's the practicality that we are gaining traction here? I know the answer to this question, but maybe lay it out on the urgency piece that we're feeling and we know our members are feeling right now.
Well, maybe you can correct me. You always do if I'm wrong. What I get nervous about is that it feels like there's a very narrow path for this getting done, and there's a lot of ways it could stumble because of the timeline, because of the election, because of the political stuff. And so what I get nervous about is that we think the Senate we would just heard maybe the Senate's coming back next week, but it is just doing committees, I should say, and very likely that both the House and Senate have no real session days between now and the election. And they're not moving on this. That's been made clear enough to us. So we started talking about the process of there's a rule that requires each chamber, the House and the Senate, to have a bill for 5 days before it can be signed into law. That means if the House wants to take something up and send it to the Senate, they need at least 5 days to take care of it, and then the Senate would have to have it. And so we're starting to look at the timeline, and as Kelly noted, if they come back the Thursday, we really only have a few days of session, and that's something that would have to be done that first day. And so we've started talking about asking leadership about their plans to get a bill, even if it's very narrowly drafted, that could then be used for the basis of these discussions and the negotiations going forward.
So we focused a lot on the Earned Sick Time Act in this conversation, but we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the minimum wage and the phase out of the tip credit as well, which means a lot to both of our members. Many of our members are in the hospitality industry, and this would obviously turn their industry on its head if it were to move forward with phasing out the tip credit specifically. So can you talk a little bit about how we're not just focused on the Earned Sick Time piece, and how we're working kind of hand in hand, specifically with Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association and the Michigan Licensed Beverage Association on that piece as well?
Yeah, they've done a tremendous job of it's part of the reason we had to focus so much on the earned sick time is because the legislature had a really clear understanding of what the changes were and what the potential risk is on the minimum wage, particularly for the tipped credit. And we've seen the advocacy efforts of servers who do not want this to change. I think that was a tremendous outpouring of support and been very vocal. And so as we work in a coalition, as we try to, move the ball forward, I think why our core group on the Big Six has been focused on the earned sick time. We've been really great to have the partners at restaurants and the Licensed Beverage Association leading on the tipped wage. And that seems like something that has a really good path. again, how do these things stay together, and all the mechanics and the politics behind it are the challenge. But again, it's very well received in those conversations as well. I don't know if you've noted it, but several of the Michigan's largest unions came out with a letter this last week, really saying don't touch the minimum wage, and was a little bit less explicit on other parts of the act. So again, we're, as a coalition, we're trying to navigate what that could mean, as how it impacts the House and Senate caucuses, as we try to figure out the way to get this done here in the next couple months.
Yes, we obviously saw the letter that came out from the union specific to your point on minimum wage and the tip credit, maybe a little less, focused on the Earned Sick Time Act. And so we actually, the Big Six, did have a press briefing last week to share our 5 buckets of issues that we feel are very reasonable. And we had not done that yet because we really wanted to be responsible and meet with legislators and to have those discussions to see if there was even traction on if there were, we saw things the same when it came to implementation. And we do feel like we're having really robust and reasonable conversations. And so, Josh, thanks so much for joining us today. It's really nice to highlight our partnership and all the work that you're doing in the West Michigan region. And we'll continue to walk this road together as we head towards the lame duck session and hopefully get this across the finish line for our members respectively.
Thanks, Kelly. And I'll always appreciate working with you and the Small Business Association. It makes working on something so terrifying as enjoyable as it can. And I look forward to celebrating with all of our friends once we get this done for our members. So I appreciate the invite, and I hope to see you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you both for that overview. I know people have been wanting to know what can they do to kind of move this along. And I am going to I shared a resource page in the chat and on Facebook. I'll also share a direct link to a call to action that we issued last week. Yes, this is the second one that we've issued, so it's a little bit more refined. And if you're so inclined to contact your legislator and let them know that you support the asks that we are advocating for, that would be fantastic. So as you talked about with Josh, the legislature was in last week on Wednesday. And they did take some actions. So can you tell us some of the things that moved and maybe some that didn't?
Yes. They were in for one day last week. They came in to work on some appropriation bills, but also when they come in for a short time period, there's usually some other things that filter in that we watch. And so there was a big movement for the Democrats specifically. The Republicans wanted to restore a $300 million funding for school safety and student mental health. They had been pushing for that since they had adjourned the last time. And the Democrats took a little bit of a different approach. They moved $125 million for Michigan students dealing with mental health issues to have those supports. And then they shifted $1 million from the mental health funds to a tip line where students can report unsecured guns they see in the homes of their friends or family, which was a little bit of a pivot. Didn't necessarily anticipate that move while they were here. Also, lawmakers, for the first time in years, they did not actually raise per pupil funding through the foundation grant. And so they did cap the contribution school districts must make to the teacher pension fund at 15.2%, which is down from 21%. And they limited the 3% contribution some educators must make toward the normal costs of retiree healthcare benefits. So 150 million costs will shift actually to the school districts. And these measures effectively will end the plan that the former administration under Governor Rick Snyder put in place to fully pay down the teacher pension liability. And it will make, essentially school finances a little less stable in the long run because of this shift. Democrats did move to restore a dues fee that allows the Service Employees International Union to deduct dues from the federal assistance payments passed through the state to caregivers. Many of them are family members that are tending to disabled loved ones. This was a practice put in place during the Granholm administration and then repealed during the Snyder administration and now put back into place under the Whitmer administration. She's made it very clear she will sign that. To note that this was actually tried to be codified in 2012 and was struck down by Michigan voters. And so that was a little bit controversial on the home health care front, something that we definitely oppose because we feel it's creeping towards the private health home health care front as well. On the good news side, we had a couple bills that we were nervous about. One, for plumbers and electricians to have a ratio, pushing people towards using plumbers and electricians on the union side. It will drastically hold back projects if going that route. That was not taken up on the floor. And also, we had been updating about an IRA bill, House Bill 5461, that would essentially make employers pay into a state retiree health care fund for their employees should they opt in, which we view as a mandate. And that was also not taken up on the floor after it was passed out of committee. So we do feel like we got a little bit of time back on those respective things. But they were not in too long that day, came in the morning and were done around 6 o'clock that night. But again, just some consternation amongst the parties and amongst certain stakeholder groups that were a little nervous about these things passing. So we will continue to watch and see what the agenda comes forward. The Senate is planning to meet still in the coming weeks leading up to the election. A reminder that they are not up for re-election. So we'll see what's happening in that chamber and what could be waiting for the House when they return after the election.
All right, well, you're mentioning the election, and it wouldn't be a show with you if we didn't talk politics just a little bit. So we continue to have high-ranking guests here in Michigan on pretty much a weekly basis at this point. What's the latest?
Yes, so last week there were quite a few people in Michigan. This just proves that Michigan continues to be a battleground state for the top of the ticket between former President Trump and Vice President Harris. Former President Trump was in Walker in West Michigan and also in Macomb last week, two very important regions for him to shore up. And then Governor Walz, obviously Vice President Harris's running mate, was also in Ann Arbor over the weekend at the U of M Minnesota game, which I don't believe that he was received very well, only because his team was playing, obviously, U of M. I think he was met with some boos, but I'm not sure that's because he's running for office. I think it's just because of his affiliation to the football team. But this week, Vice President Harris will be in Flint on Friday, and then J.D. Vance, Senator running alongside former President Trump, will be in Auburn Hills on Wednesday, and then end his day in Marne, which is actually a smaller town in West Michigan on the Ottawa-Kent border. And so what does this tell us? What it tells us is that they're really trying to shore up their bases of their folks that would vote for them. Trump is very popular in Macomb, and traditionally West Michigan has tended to vote lean right, and that has kind of swayed a little bit over the years, but they're trying to win that back. So it's not a surprise that Trump is kind of going from west to east or east to west when he's here. And J.D. Vance is definitely more of an evangelical Christian, which does, there's more that tend to, sway that way when it comes to West Michigan. And so you're starting to see them pop up in places that make sense for their base to get them excited to get out and vote. As a reminder that Donald Trump did lose to Joe Biden only by 3 percentage points in Michigan when they ran back in 2020. And so this is going to be continue to be a very big battleground state. And so when you see all these folks popping up in these different regions, it's because it's go time. We are approaching the finish line, my friends. And so I'm sorry if you get stuck in traffic. If you see cop cars everywhere, they've got to obviously block off those roads in order to make sure that those candidates can get where they need to be. And so buckle up for the next couple weeks, because that is going to be a continual factor in your travels as you go back and forth to work, home, wherever you may be going.
Let's kind of stay on this topic, but talk about the Michigan State House of Representative elections. Some new ads have been launched recently. Where are these candidates spending some cash?
Yes, there were a couple articles over the weekend. Democrats definitely have in the Michigan House of Representatives a cash edge. They are spending a 4-to-1 advantage over Democrats over the GOP so far in ad spending. And so right now, Democrats have spent 6.3 million on advertising in 14 competitive Michigan House races, and that's up against 1.5 million by Republicans. So 6.3 to 1.5 million. That is quite an edge. This is reported by Ad Impact, which is a political advertising data firm. They keep track of where placements are and how much money is being spent. And so this is showing up in the 61st House District. They are spending 1.1 million on behalf of Representative Menser, and then compared to her $30,000 spent on her opponent. Similar in the 31st House District, 1.1 million has been spent on behalf of Representative Reggie Miller against her Republican opponent Dale Benecki, just at 30,000. And then 2 races where Republicans have outspent Democrats, though, are in the 83rd House District, where just shy of $250,000 has been spent on behalf of Republican Tommy Brand, who in the past has served in the legislature and now is rerunning for his seat, which is currently held by Representative John Fitzgerald. They've spent just south of $150,000 on him. And then also a very contested race in northern Michigan, Lisa Trombley. They've spent Republicans $226,000 to Betsy Kofias, who's the current sitting representative, at $198,000. And so reservations of money change as we approach elections. They're constantly doing polling and deciding where the best chance for that race is. And so we're going to see this fluctuate a little bit. The Democrat spending is down a little bit from the past couple weeks. They were at 30 million and now coming in at 25.8 million. Again, Republicans are at 3.45 million in reserved money. And so they are still Republicans focused the most on Representative Kathy Schmaltz's district in Jackson. That's a hot one down there. And so be paying attention to that. And then also the Oakland County seats currently held by Representative Donnie Steele, Representative Tom Kuhn, and Representative Mark Tisdale. There is a battle there for those seats, and still watching the Representative Hadsma district in Battle Creek and Representative Jamie Church's district in Wyandotte. So there are a lot of contested races all over the state. We just want to remind you to visit sbm.org. We do have a full page of those representatives that we have endorsed through our small biz pack. If you're interested in knowing more, you can always reach out to Jacob and I here at SBM. But that is your report on the Michigan House of Representatives and the money that's flowing through your airwaves.
Yes, so much money and very evident based on the amount of commercials that are being displayed. So Kelly, voting is a little bit different. It's not the first time we've done this, but we do have some more options than just your traditional absentee ballot or going to the poll on election day. So do you want to give people a brief overview about what they can expect ahead of November 5th?
Yes, so reminder that voting has definitely changed here in Michigan. You can obviously absentee vote. That's been a part of, our election process for a long time. You can also in-person vote at your respective township or location, city, and then also, of course, day of voting. We want to encourage you to visit the Michigan Secretary of State website, which I know, Sarah, you're going to drop in. You can plug in your name and it will give you a list of where you can either get your absentee vote ballot, where you can go and vote early, because there are certain hours for when those are open. They're not open all the time. And then also where you vote day of. And so we are 36 days out from the election. That is going to go incredibly quick. But make sure that you know how to vote. Just a fun fact, if you will, Michigan has been in line with who has ever won the White House 9 of the last 11 elections. And so that's, make sure that your voice is heard, make sure that you're going to the polls in voting, but make sure you're educated too. You can view your sample ballot through that link that Sarah also dropped in And again, if you have any issues with figuring all that out, we're here for you at SBM to help you through that.
Yes, always good to double check that you are registered to vote and that you know where to vote and how you can make that happen. Kelly, real quickly, because we're wrapping up today, why don't you give us a brief update on what seems to be a little Groundhog's Day for Stellantis?
Yes, so there was a letter that was sent out at the end of last week from Sean Fain of the UAW, almost like preempting a strike with Stellantis. They are citing that the contract negotiations from last year are not being met for the workers. And Stellantis has definitely made some moves to say that they could not move forward on a few of them of things that were agreed to because of market changes. They've also said that they are going to have to do layoffs throughout the company because they are not reaching those benchmarks. The company does say that it's not been a part of those contract negotiations for them to have the right to strike. So there is a little bit of a battle back and forth. This is just hurtful to our economy. Every time we have potential of these strikes that pop up for our big automakers, the way that it affects the supply chains that feed into it, it hurts Michigan. And so we just bring that to you because we know that it affects so many of our members or just our economy in general here in Michigan. And so be making sure that you are watching the news to see what happens with the Stellantis disagreements that the UAW is currently having. We will certainly keep you updated, but just an unfortunate turn again with our automakers and the UAW.
All right, but let's end on a high note,
Yes.
Kelly. All right.
Our friends, the Detroit Tigers, have made the playoffs once again, and that is enough reason for us to rejoice. So it has been 10 years, folks, but we have finally made it back, and our Detroit Tigers are going to the playoffs. So let's just enjoy this run. They have been doing an amazing job, and we love our sports here in Michigan. So go Tigers.
Go Tigers. All right. Thanks for tuning in today. Kelly, thanks for joining me. I hope everybody has a great week, and we will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
Have a great week.